They flourished and exploded and conquered, and it is now a non-Christian world and has been for 15 centuries. And you may ask, well, how is it gone, wiped out, obliterated in one generation? So how can that happen? Because the bottom line is that we're always, never more than just one generation away from paganism. The future of the church rests upon our bringing the little children to the Lord. That's right. And our young people. And Jesus knew that. That's why he said, bring the little children unto me. If we break that link, we lose a generation. Right. And then all is lost. We're always one generation away from oblivion. The sad thing is that Israel ended up doing exactly what the Pharaoh had proposed. They lost the whole generation. And the thing that you need to see, how did that happen? Well, you need to see that Israel forgot some things. There were some things that the nation of Israel forgot. Isn't it strange how quickly Israel forgot what God had done for them in their midst? First of all, they forgot the struggle and their humble beginning. Here was a group of ragamuffin people who had wandered about in the wilderness with clothes that stayed on their back for 40 years. Can you imagine? There was a group of people who came out of the land of Egypt with only that which they had borrowed from their Egyptian neighbors. They had no arms, they had no military might, they had no strength. They started with absolutely nothing. And there they were struggling in the wilderness. And their very existence depended upon the hand of God. And yet they forgot so quickly all about, when they moved into the land of Canaan, they forgot all these other things. They became a mighty power in the Middle East. And they forgot that struggle. And they forgot their humble beginnings. And then Israel forgot the victory that was totally of the Lord. When they were out in the wilderness, they had absolutely nothing but the hand of God to depend on. Every victory, everything that came to them came directly from the hand of God. And they saw that. Yes. Moses said, tomorrow God is going to send manna. They went out, there it was. Praise God. God delivered them from the hands of the Amalekites. And they knew that victory was from the Lord. But after a while, they arrived in the land of Canaan. They forgot those victories came from the Lord. And they became dependent upon themselves. And they began to make alliances with the Canaanites. And after having forgotten that, they lost their faith. They lost their victory spirit. It was over because they forgot their victories came from the Lord. Amen. We have to remember, with all of our methods, with all of our tools, with everything that we use, we must be continually reminded that every single victory we have, every single soul that is won, every single building that is built, every single great revival that we have, it all comes from God. Amen. And when we get to the place where we're dependent upon ourselves and we forget that the victories come from God, we are contributing to the delinquency of the next generation. We should remind our people of our history and remind them that God gave everything to us. Amen. Everything that we have. When Israel came to cross the river Jordan, God told Israel to take 12 stones and put them in the river, and take 12 stones and put them by the side of the river. And those stones, the Bible says, were to be a reminder. So that when the sons came by and asked their father, what do these stones mean? The fathers would say, son, many years ago we came by this place, a very poor people, without anything, but God brought us across this river. You see, God wanted them to remember the victories were of the Lord, but they forgot when they got into the land. And when they forgot, they turned to the gods of Baal and Ashtaroth. And the other thing they forgot was that God's blessings were conditional. God did not say to Israel, do what you wish, and I will bless you. In Exodus 19:5, God says, if you will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. He said, if ye will hear my voice. God laid down conditions for his blessings. And when Israel forgot the blessings of God, they forgot they were conditional, they turned to the gods of Baal and Ashtaroth, and they lost the blessings of God as well. It is only as we are committed to the Bible, to prayer, to fasting, to witnessing, where we have the blessings of God. Amen. We have to remember the blessings are conditional. And then Israel changed some things. That's another thing. Israel also turned from God of Israel to the gods of Baal and Ashtaroth because of the things they changed. I have to say, I don't really like change. I know that Pentecostals really don't like change. In fact, I've got to the place where I don't ever say the word change around here. I just talk about improvements. Because our people are so reluctant to change anything. They can't get under your skin. You know, you move the chairs on the platform. Some people the next Sunday, they see the chairs moved on the platform. The service is over for them. They can't tell you what the preacher preached, but they can tell you that the chairs were moved on the platform. They don't complain. But, you know, there is an element there that I do like. I'm glad we want to hold on to tradition, to do the things that made us what we are, the things that made us great, and really brought us and built us to what we are. Those are the things that will keep us. After, and I believe God is going to give us such a surging revival that we're not only going to have to make some improvements, we're going to have to build. Amen. If you don't like change, think about when you have to change this whole building. We're going to have psychiatrists, spiritual psychiatrists. Anyway, these are the things that will keep us after we do have to knock out the walls, after we get large. We need to be careful, though, about the things that we change. This is what Israel did. Israel made some major changes. And out of those changes arose a departure from the God of Israel. I'll show you what they changed. The first place, Israel changed her goals. When Israel moved into the land of Canaan, she was coming there with the goals that God gave them in Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 4. The goal to drive out the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Jebusites and others. They were to drive them out, take the entire land. That was their goal. They came there with a fight on their mind. They came there to take the land because God had told them to do so. He said, make no alliances with them. He said, don't join with them. Don't let your sons and daughters marry them.
Yes.
He said, come in and occupy the land. Yeah. But after a while, according to Judges 1:27 and Judges 2:2, they began to say, well, you know, we don't really have to do all this fighting. Why don't we make some alliances with some of the people in the land of Canaan? Why don't we extract some taxes from them? And they did so, and their goals were changed from occupying the land to peace at any price. Let's have peace in our land, they said. And if we're going to have an aggressive soul-winning church, if this is going to be an aggressive soul-winning church, we are going to have enemies in our city.
Yes.
We should not worry about them.
Yes.
We should worry about our relationship with the God of the universe.
Hallelujah.
I don't want peace at any price in my community. There are some people in my community I don't want to like me. There are some people in my community, they would offend me if they liked what I said. The drug dealers and the prostitution pushers and the corrupt people in politics, if they liked what I said, then I would feel offended. And then there's a second change in this that is perhaps the most destructive. Israel changed their goal to respectability. When they got in the land, they suddenly found themselves to be a world power. They were at the crossroads geographically between the east and the west, between Egypt and Babylon. All trade routes flowed through Israel.
Right.
And after a while, they discovered, they woke up one day and said, you know what, we're a mighty power. You remember the time when they called for Samuel and said, we want a king? And Samuel asked, why do you want a king? Don't you know that if you get a king, he'll take your sons and daughters and put them into his service. He'll tax you for his armies. Why do you want a king? They said, we want a king so we can be like other nations. There is a pressure in society sometimes for the church to conform to the world. Paul said, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed. Then the people of Israel also changed another thing. And that was their opinion of themselves. Yes. There was a time in the history of the nation of Israel that they knew they were totally dependent upon God. When they came to Jericho, they didn't have anything but horns to blow. When they came to the river Jordan, they had nothing there but faith in God. They knew they were helpless and they were weak. But after a while, they began to see themselves as a prestigious element in society. You know what scares me most about being Pentecostal? It is that folks have finally recognized that we were around. When I was in Israel the first time, 3 times ago, I don't know how many years ago, Pentecostals weren't even a blip on the radar. You know, when we went this time, everybody knew about Pentecost. Not only knew about Pentecost, everybody wanted to claim they were Pentecostal. I remember when nobody wanted to be Pentecost. That was terrible. Now everybody wants to be Pentecost. Yes. You know, it is that folks have finally recognized that we're around. The media is now beginning to write about us, about how large we are, how many votes we control, and that we're a segment of society. So I say, okay, let them talk about it. But let us not talk about it so much. We need the same opinion of ourselves that we've always had. That is that we're weak and helpless. And all we have comes from God. Hallelujah. And Israel turned from God because of the things they lost. Israel turned from God, they lost some things. And the things that they lost, first of all, Israel lost her conviction about separation. You know, maybe a young man came in and said, Mom, I don't understand this prohibition about marrying one of these Canaanite girls. They are really nice girls and they are really nice looking. And so I don't understand it. Why shouldn't I marry one of those Canaanite girls? It just seems like a silly restriction to me. But what he did not know was that God had ordained it to keep Israel from idols. Because the sons and daughters of the Canaanites worshipped idols. And God wanted them to be separated. But Israel slowly lost her conviction about separation and began to intermarry with the Canaanites. And when they did, they turned to their gods. Baal and Ashtoreth. Amen. I don't care about how much recognition we get. We need to call sin by name. We need to talk about ungodly movement. And talk about smoking. And talk about dancing. And talk about drinking. And talk about drugs. And talk about ungodly dress. Talk about homosexuality. Talk about abortion. We should be eliminated. We need to always keep the sense of separation in the church. That we are different. We are someone that stands against sin. There is such a thing. The last thing, Israel lost her conviction about doctrine. She got to the place she didn't believe anything. It's kind of a new phenomenon now that the preacher is supposed to just love everybody. You know, kind of a good God, good devil kind of religion. And you can't find a sin anywhere. There's just nothing to sin. And he said, well, what about doctrine? I have had him tell me, doctrine is divisive. We don't have any doctrine. Well, what do you preach if you don't have any doctrine? You preach on the poems of Tennyson? What on earth do you have without doctrine? That's the Bible. In the beginning, God. That's the first doctrine. On that doctrine, every doctrine in the Bible is built. You have to have doctrine. We must never ever get away from preaching doctrine. Jesus' name, baptism, the one God, the Spirit, the Holy Ghost, everything the doctrine of separation. We must not let our doctrine slip away. And I think another thing Israel lost too, and they forgot their obligation to the next generation. Paul said in Romans 1:14, he said, I am debtor. Paul is not just stating what's on his heart, but he's expounding a law of nature. Yes. There is nothing in the material world that lives to itself. It's also the instinct of man in life. Nobody lives to themselves. Nobody dies to themselves. We are indebted to so many people. For the light bulb, Thomas Edison; for the car, Henry Ford; for the airplane, the Wright brothers. We're indebted. I stand before you and say, in my heart, I am debtor. If there's anything to admire in me, let me say, I am debtor. I am debtor, first of all, to God. I don't know where I would be if God had not saved me. There is no telling what God has kept me from. He's kept me from things I don't even know about. I am debtor to the church. Everything I have came from the church. The church gave me birth. It's my mother. Zion travailed and sons and daughters were born. The church cares for me. I wish I could count the things that the church has forgiven me of and written off and never mentioned. I owe the church everything.
Everything.
I am debtor to the past. I owe something to the ones who have gone before me. But they are gone. Now I'm the one and you're the one. But most of all, I'm debtor to the next generation. I like that public prayer, Psalm 78, verse 1 through 5. O my people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden from old, things we have heard and known, things our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from our children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power, and the wonders He has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which He commanded our forefathers to teach their children. And the psalmist said, tell them and teach them. That's what God was saying to the psalmist. According to this prayer, this present generation is responsible to do those two things for their children in their community. Tell them God's stories and teach them God's truth. First, we have to tell them God's story. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power, and the wonders He has done. You know, one of the ways faith is passed on in ancient Israel was by storytelling. In fact, if you look very closely at the rest of Psalm 78, you see how it tells the story of how God brought His people out of Egypt, sent them manna from heaven, settled them in Canaan. You'll see how God forgave them when they sinned, gave them a king named David. Storytelling was an art among the people of God. It was a primary pastime as families worked together in the field or the shop, as they sat around fires in the evening. Elders would tell the stories to their children and to their children's children. They would tell the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, stories of creation and the flood, stories from the battlefield and stories from the tabernacle. Those stories gave to the next generation a sense of identity, of belonging as a people of God. They came to believe that the God who worked marvelously in their ancestors lives and can work just as marvelously in their lives as well. And telling stories continues to be a primary means of passing faith on to our children. That's why the major emphasis of our ministry to children is to tell them stories from the Bible and from life. Our Sunday school classes involve a storytelling time. I like Brother Everett. He was over in Israel and he bought some things and he said, I want to buy these things because this is a visual effect I can get before the children and I can show them what this means and what that means. That's exactly what's talked about here. And as children look at those things and they listen as the scenes unfold in their imagination, lessons are being learned, values are being instilled, faith is being passed on to the next generation. And it's not just the Bible stories that need to be told. We need to tell our stories as well. When a child tells you he's afraid, don't give him a Bible verse. Don't just give him a prayer. Tell him a story about the time you were afraid and God protected you and God held your fears. When a child or a young person is sad, tell a story about a time when you were sad and God comforted your heart. Have you ever told your children your faith story? Do you know when and how and why? Do they know when and how and why you came to serve God? Have you ever taken them to places of spiritual meaning to you? Or introduced them to people that shaped your life? If the next generation is going to know the Lord and trust the Lord, we have to tell them praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, the stories that will open their hearts to His work in their lives. But we also must teach them God's truth. Faith is more than experiences with God. It is truth about God. Truth that needs to be communicated and explained and applied to life. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which He commanded our forefathers to teach our children.
Teach us, Jesus.
If you're not taking advantage of your church's ministries to children and teens, let me remind you, you cannot train. You cannot raise children spiritually by yourself.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Pastor.
I have to disagree with Hillary. It's not just a village. It takes a church.
Yeah,
That's what it takes. But this teaching also takes place at home.
Yes.
There are times when parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles sit down with children and teach them God's truth. So this prayer for the next generation is actually a prayer for the present generation to fulfill its responsibility to pass their faith on to their children and young people by telling them God's stories and teaching them God's truth. And it wasn't just a prayer for parents, it was for the entire community of faith.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Oh, listen, I feel like you need to hear what I have to say.
Say it, Pastor. Preach it.
If ever there was a time when it was crucial for the current generation to fulfill that responsibility, it seems to be now. They tell us that the present population of elementary schools is the largest, school children is the largest it's ever been. Back in 2003, there were 73 million, and it's grown since then. And now a record number are moving into adolescence. We also know this, that the current generation of children and young people are growing up in the most secularized environment in our nation's history.
Lord have mercy.
They will not be hearing the stories of the Bible or the messages of Jesus Christ anywhere but in the homes and the churches. I'll tell you what, it bothers me when people who I know they don't tell them in their homes, and then they don't bring their kids to church. And then they're going to wonder someday, they're going to wake up and wonder, why in the world do my children, why are they so wild? Why don't they have any thought of God? It's because
You're not taught.
you never taught it to them.
You never taught them.
That's where it has to be. Amen.
Yes.
Oh God.
Yes.
You know, excuse me. They have to hear it.
Yes.
Got to hear.
Even if your children go to a Christian school, if it doesn't teach the truth,
Yes.
they're still not getting the full. You know, they may be getting some of the Bible stories, but they're not getting the full truth.
Yes.
Amen. We also know that childhood and adolescence are the most formative years of a person's life, spiritual speaking. George Barna, who writes a lot about different things, research, and he has done significant research in this area in recent years, and he says that somewhere between 76 and 85% of all who follow the Lord make their decision to follow the Lord before the age of 18. And that the vast majority of these decisions will be made before the age of 14. And he also says that what a person believes at the age of 13, they are likely to believe for the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, according to Barn and others, this generation is being overlooked and underreached by the vast majority of churches. While children and young people represent over 40% of the population of an average church, less than 15% of the church's budget goes toward children and young people's ministry. Even though children and young people have been shown to be far more receptive to the gospel message than adults, most churches focus their evangelistic efforts on reaching adults. And even though the childhood and adolescent years have been shown to be the most formative years of a person's life spiritually, churches continue to focus their discipling ministries on the education and development of adults. When a random sample of senior pastors was taken, they asked to identify their church's top ministry priorities. Only 24% even mentioned ministry to children. 20 or 30 years ago, the first position to be filled on a church staff when you had the money after the senior pastor was a youth pastor or a Christian educational director. Now the first staff person hired is what they call a worship pastor or something else that's associated primarily with adult programming. In light of the tremendous opportunities represented by this current generation of young people, and in the light of the feeble efforts by many current churches to reach this generation, Barna and others are calling for a radical recommitment to ministry for children and young people. Challenging churches to make children their number one priority. And he puts it this way. If you want to have a lasting influence upon the world, you must invest in people's lives. And he said if you want to maximize that investment, then you have to invest in those people while they are young.
Yes.
We're like in a relay race. And those who run before us set the pace for those who follow. My first and best experience with a relay race came in about the 6th grade. When I was in a church camp. I was part of the 440 relay team, and we were representing our church in this church camp. And we were against other groups from other churches. Every relay team has its own strategy. Ours was very simple. Put Wiser where he can do the least damage. That was our strategy. I thought I was fast, and they didn't think I was very fast. So they put me in the 2nd position. And because the fastest guy is in the 1st position. And so their idea was the first guy was going to be so fast, he would open the big lead up, so we'd have such a head start that by the time the 2nd runner had, if all went well, I could just hold on to some of the lead and then pass it on to the 3rd. And actually, that's exactly how it went. The gun went off, our first runner exploded out of the starting lane. He jumped out there to a quick lead, and I watched him. He was just exerting himself. He extended that lead in every stride. But not only did he give me the advantage of a head start than the other runners, but it set a pace for me. I looked at him and I said, you know what? If he can do that, maybe I can do it. And it made me try harder. I see how it's done. I'm going to try to do it. Well, I'm going to tell you, a similar thing happens as spiritual values are passed from one generation to the next. Each one looks to the preceding generation to see how the race is supposed to be run. And each generation brings to the one that follows either a head start or a handicap.
Yeah.
Look at the verses that Paul wrote. He writes to Timothy. And he says, I have been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice. And I am persuaded now lives in you also. Now notice how the race began with a woman named Lois. She ran the first leg. We don't know how she came to faith, but she ran a good race. Then she passed the baton of faith on to her daughter Eunice, who handed it off to her son Timothy. 3 generations. But notice the particular kind of faith that was passed on. It was sincere faith, not just religion, not cultural Christianity, but real faith, life-saving, life-changing faith. Like a runner in that 3rd position, Timothy watched his predecessors run the race, and he learned what real faith looked like. What kind of pace are you setting for the children and the young people that are watching you? Is the quality of your faith giving them a head start, or is it giving them a handicap? Because make no mistake about it, the children of this church and the children of your family and the young people are watching you. Whether you're a parent or not, children and young people in this church, children in this neighborhood and young people in this neighborhood, children in your extended family and young people in your extended family are watching to see how you work, how you worship, how you treat people, how you spend your time, how you spend your money. You know what they're looking for? They're looking for authenticity. They're not looking for perfection. They know you're human. They know you make mistakes. What they're looking for is faith, sincere faith that's real and personal to you.
Amen. Amen.
Survey after survey reveals that this is what children and young people want. They're looking for in their churches. Authenticity. Do we really love others? Do we really worship? Do we really want to know God and follow Him every single day? The style of the worship music is not nearly as important as the fact that when people around them are singing the songs, do they really believe what they're singing? The hypness of the teacher and the leader is not as important as their humble, honest, caring spirit. They want to see the real thing. And I'm not just talking about parents here. Children and young people look at all the adults in their lives to set the pace for them. Amen.
Amen.
George Barner reports that nearly half of today's teens say they have no positive role models in their lives. You could be one of those role models to your children and your young people, in your family and in your church. You can show them how the race is run. You can give them a head start on their spiritual journey simply by taking an interest in them, by sharing with them some of your time and energy, by taking their living a vibrant faith in front of them.
Amen. Amen.
You have to, we have to make a handoff. It's like a relay race. We have to make a handoff to the next generation. And a successful handoff is a result of 1,000 practice runs. Right. In the Summer Olympic Games in Athens, the American women 4x100 relay race was favored to win the gold medal. That team featured Mary Jones, she was a sprinter. She won 4 gold medals at the previous games in Sydney. The American team was already off to a strong start, but Jones when she took the baton for the second leg of the race, she gained as she went around her 100, and then she was going to pass the baton to Lauren Williams, and Lauren Williams was fast, just about faster than all of them. She was really fast. She was going to run the third leg. She began running as Jones drew near, but when she reached back to receive the baton, she couldn't complete the handoff. Once, twice, 3 times. Jones thrust the baton forward, but each time it missed Williams' hands, or she couldn't seem to wrap her fingers around it. Finally, on the 4th try, they made a connection. But by that time, they had crossed out of the 20-yard exchange zone, and they were disqualified. Everybody knew that they were the fastest team on the track. The night before, they had run the fastest qualifying time, but when they couldn't complete the handoff, the race was over. As important as it is for the previous generation to set the pace by living authentically, at a certain point, a handoff has to be made in which the next generation receives the baton of faith and begins to run with it. The handoff isn't as easy as it looks. It isn't automatic.
Right.
It's a result of thousands and thousands of practice runs. That's what the Lord calls for. In Deuteronomy 6, where we read, "These commandments I give to you today are to be in your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up." These verses remind us that this teaching happens formally and informally, at home and at church. Some of it takes place unintentionally, and some of it intentionally. With children or teens, as they look at God's Word together. Some of it takes place as you walk through life, responding to situations, or talking over challenges and difficulties. You can't rush this process.
Yes.
It goes on for years and years and years.
Yes.
It's a result of 1,000 bedtime prayers and 1,000 questions about God and faith and heaven and the Bible.
Yeah.
And 1,000 trips back and forth to church to pick up and drop off your kids, your young people. Unlike an Olympic race, there is no specified zone in which the handoff can and must take place. For some, it'll happen at 5 years old, others 9 or 13, or after they go off to college. The truth is, there will likely be several trial exchanges before the baton is fully passed. But whenever it happens, it will be the result of hours and hours of practice, years and years of walking the track of life. There'll be times when you wonder if it's worth the effort. Parents, how many nights do you read a Bible story to your kids or pray with them as you tuck them into bed? And there are no remarkable insights, and there's no deep conversations. And it feels like that you're just going through the motions. And I want to tell you, that's exactly right. You are doing that. You are going through the motions. So that when it's time for the real handoff to take place, those motions will come naturally. You and your children are learning to talk about spiritual things. So when an important conversation needs to happen, it can happen and will happen.
Yes, it will.
You're imparting values so that when a decision needs to be made, it will be made quickly and correctly. That your child or teenager is getting used to the feel of the baton in his or her hand, so that when at some later point in life, when they reach for it, the fingers will easily grasp it.
Yes.
Amen.
God.
Amen. Do you believe it?
Amen. Amen.
Yes.
As I said, it's not only parents who make the handoff. Our children have made some important faith decisions at home with us, but they have made others. They have made others with Sunday school teachers and others with youth workers and saints of God. Can you imagine, once you make a handoff, they get it. We need to keep cheering.
Right.
Can you imagine a relay race in which the first runner makes the handoff and watches his teammate take off running, and then he picks up his sweats and heads into the locker room without watching the end of the race? I don't think so. He's going to watch and cheer and channel every bit of psychic energy he can to speed his teammate along. The race isn't over after the baton is passed. There's still important work to be done. So it is in the relay race of faith.
Amen.
You can set a pace for your children by the way you run, giving them a good head start. You practice the handoff for years as you jog through childhood and adolescence. But when the exchange is made or muffed, you're not done. You need to keep cheering.
Hallelujah.
That's the truth of the church. Not just parents, but church people.
Right. Come on.
Now, what do I mean by keep cheering? What am I thinking about? I'm thinking about what Paul said to the letter to the Thessalonians. He said, "For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory." Amen. I knew of a man one time, he said, he was a great Christian man, a great minister. And he said, he remembered a day when a young man called him. He said, I remembered him. He was a kid from my youth group some years earlier. He wasn't a church kid, but he had come into the church, and he got in church. And the church became his second home. And he said, I spent a lot of time with him. And I taught him a lot of things from Scripture, and I mentored him. And he went off to university, and he drifted away from the Lord. But he said, we stayed in touch. And he remained in my prayers, but he was backslid. But now he was out of school and in the marketplace, and I knew he was doing very well for himself. But now he was calling, and he wasn't calling just to say hi. He was calling to tell me, he said he had cancer, bad cancer. And could I come to see him? He never actually said this. He said, but what he was asking me was, can I help him die? So I said I did. He said we began to talk about his relationship with God. We prayed together. He prayed back through. He said, I even performed his wedding just months before he died. But he said, I was so glad that he felt free to call me. So glad that I was still on the track with a baton. So I hadn't gotten all that. What if I hadn't still been on the track with a baton in my hand? But he said, I was so glad I was still on the track with a baton, and it was waiting for him to grab on. And he grabbed onto the baton that day, and he started running, and he ran right on into heaven. My experience is that most people raised in faith will embrace it at some time in their life. They may wander away, and they may be wasted years, but there may be hurt and there may be heartache, but usually they come back, and they're looking for that baton. They're looking for that baton, and when they do, you better make sure you're on the track. You better make sure you got it there. You're ready to make the handoff. So keep cheering, keep cheering, keep cheering. I just want to say this. We say we believe in faithfulness. Then we need to be faithful to the house of God and the things of God, or the next generation is not going to know anything about faithfulness. We say we believe in worship. Then we better worship God, or the next generation is not going to know anything about worship. We say we believe in holiness. We better live holy, or the next generation won't know anything about holiness.
Holiness. Woo!
We must realize we are always only one generation away from Oblivion. We wander off the track, throw our baton down. Next generation has nothing to hold on to.
Oh, Jesus.
Nothing to run with.
Oh, Jesus.
And we've lost it. That's what God is saying. Hey, with all of our vision, we better get this vision right. I am debtor to that next generation. I don't want to lose our young people, and I don't want to lose our children.
Amen.
You don't want to leave, I don't believe. God help us. I want God to give us a very special touch today. As we reach out to Him, I want Him to give us a special anointing. A special anointing. A special anointing. I want to be aware. I want to be aware of the coming generation.
Hallelujah.
And I want to be a force.
Yes, Lord.
I want to be a force.
Yes.
I want to set the pace. I want them to see how the race is run. I look at me.
Amen.
Let's sing. God bless you.
Thank you.
You can have baptism in a moment. But right now, let's just talk to the Lord. Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Lord Jesus. Thank you, Lord Jesus.
Thank you, Lord.
Hallelujah.
Oh, God.
Hallelujah.
Thank you, Jesus.
Hallelujah, Jesus.
Thank you, Jesus.
Hallelujah,
Oh, God.
worthy, Jesus. Worthy.
Oh, God. Oh, God. I feel the depth of the Holy Ghost in this church.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you,
Oh, God.
Thank you, Jesus.
Why don't you make your way to the front? Let's talk to the Lord. Say, God, give me an anointing. Give me an anointing. Give me an anointing. Let's find a place to pray. You need the Holy Ghost. Come on. Come on. God wants to fill you with the Holy Ghost. And you're in a church. We're going to set the pace for you. We're going to do it. Praise God. Let's come and pray. Come and pray. Come and seek the Lord. If you're away from God, this is a good time to come back to God. Come on, the baton is waiting. Wait.